are the nasal, lacrimals, palatine, inferior nasal conchae, vomer, maxillary, zygomatic bones, and mandible. Starting over with the nasal bone, let's get to check about the nasal bone. And with us, the paired nasal bones are small, flattened, rectangular-shaped bones on either side of the midline below the glabellar region of the frontal, and they form the bridge of the nose. These small bones protect the upper entry to the nasal cavity and provide attachment for a couple of thin muscles of facial expression. The major structural portion of the nose consists of cartilage. Then the nasal articulate with the frontal superiorly, with each other medially, and with frontal process of the maxilla laterally, and posteriorly they articulate with the ethmoid bone. For the nasal bone, they're just here. It's not hard to identify them from the anterior view of the skull, and particularly they are here. The nasal foramen, they don't have much to be described about, and I think that's all we can say about the nasal bone. For the lacrimal bone, the paired lacrimal bones are thin, fragile, rectangular-shaped bones, and these bones are the smallest of the face, are posterior and lateral to the nasal bones and form a part of the medial wall of each orbit. They articulate with the frontal, maxillary, ethmoid, and inferior nasal conchae. The posterior lacrimal crest is a vertical crest on the medial orbital wall that bounds the posterior half of the lacrimal groove. Just as like the nasal bone, they don't have much description, and we can be able to identify the lacrimal bone. This is the anterior aspect, and as well we have the anterior aspect here, and the anterior is to the left. So this is the lateral, and the medial aspect. So for this case, we have the lacrimal groove of lacrimal bone. 12, 13 is the posterior lacrimal crest. 14 is the fossa for lacrimal sac. Then we have the lacrimal humulus. Another bone of the face is the palatine, which is the two L-shaped bones, forms the posterior portion of the hard palate or the roof of the mouth. In addition to the roof of the mouth, they form the posterior portion of the floor and walls of the nasal cavity. The superior aspect of the perpendicular plates contribute to a small portion of the floor of the orbit bordering the optic foramen or the canal. So the palatine bone, let's get to find it from the skeleton. And this is the lateral or the medial section through the skull. Sorry, the medial actually. So the palatine bone is labeled by the part 6. This is the palatine bone, and it's white. For the bone itself, we have the medial anterior to the left, conchae crest, then we have this, whereby we have the perpendicular plate, there you go, palatine canal, then we have the posterior palatine, whereby posterior nasal spine and the pyramidal process right there. Superior lateral is to the right, and then we have the inferior palatine, whereby lateral is to the left. So horizontal plate is there, then we have greater palatine foramen, then the lesser palatine foramina. Okay, the palatine bone is painted with the red, and those structures within the palatine have the orbital process. Then we have 11 is the perpendicular plate, 12 is the conchae, then 13 this point is the nasal crest process, then 14 is the horizontal plate. Let's move to another bone, which is the inferior nasal conchae. And for this, the inferior nasal conchae extend horizontally along the lateral walls of the nasal cavity, articulating with the medial wall of the maxillae and the palatines, and they articulate as well with the ethmoid and lacrimal bones superiorly. The two inferior nasal conchae are inferior to the middle nasal conchae of the ethmoid bone. These scroll-like bones form a part of the inferior lateral walls of the nasal cavity and project into the nasal cavity. Let's check from the skull, where exactly do we find this bone. So the inferior nasal conchae is right here. For the bone itself, lateral, anterior is to the right. Then we have anterior, lateral is to the left. Finally, medial, anterior is to the left. So that's all about what did I meant? So that's all about the superior nasal conchae. So all three pairs of nasal conchae, superior, middle, and inferior, increase the mucosal covered surface of the nasal cavity and help swell and filter air before it passes through the lungs. However, only the superior nasal conchae of the ethmoid bone are involved in the sense of smell. That's all about the nasal conchae. Let's get ahead and find, okay, this is another image of the same bone. To the right, inferior nasal conchae. Have the part labeled 2 is the anterior part of the conchae, then 1 is the ethmoidal process, 6 is the lacrimal process, the part labeled 7 is the posterior part of the conchae, and finally the part labeled 8 for this case is the maxillary process. Another bone of the face is the vomer, and the unpaired vomer is a roughly triangular bone on the floor of the nasal cavity that articulates superiorly with the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone and the inferior surface of the body of the sphenoid bone. Inferiorly, the vomer articulates with the both maxillary and palatine bones along the midline. It forms the inferior portion of the body nasal septum and the partition that divides the nasal cavity into right and left side. The sides here, okay? So for this bone within the skull, we have it right there. You can see, and that is the vomer. So for the bone itself, we have with us right here. This is the posterior aspect, and as well this is the posterior aspect, and we have the posterior border, ally, or wings of the same bone. That's much about a vomer. And then let's get to its description. Ally wings of the vomer are located on either sides of a deep midline furrow on the superior surface of the vomer. Then the perpendicular plate is a thin vertical sheet of bone on the midline below the wings. Posterior border divides the posterior nasal aperture into two halves. And then we have nasopalatine groove, which is a large nasopalatine nerves and vessel marking both sides of the perpendicular plate where they run anterior-inferiorly from the ally. So the nasopalatine groove lodges these nasopalatine nerves and those vessels.